200 people watched my own son turn me away at my granddaughter's wedding. He stood there in his expensive tuxedo, blocking the entrance like I was some stranger who had wandered in off the street. "Mother, you're not on the list." The invitation was a mistake. Those words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to flinch. I refused to give him or his wife the satisfaction of watching me crumble in front of everyone I had known for decades. Old friends from church were staring. Neighbors I had borrowed sugar from and shared holiday dinners with stood frozen with champagne glasses in their hands. The women from my book club whispered behind manicured fingers. 200 pairs of eyes watched Patricia Sullivan, a 67-year-old widow who had helped build a $6.2 million estate, be turned away like uninvited trash from her own granddaughter's wedding. I looked at my son David, searching for some trace of the little boy who used to hold my hand at Sunday service. I looked at his wife, Victoria, standing just behind him, and I saw exactly what I expected to see, that cold, satisfied smile she had been perfecting for 20 years. I looked at the security guard they had actually hired to keep me out, a young man who could not meet my eyes because even he knew this was wrong. The string quartet kept playing, the white roses kept blooming in their perfect arrangements. The evening kept unfolding, as though my heart was not breaking into 1,000 pieces, right there on the manicured lawn of the Westbrook Country Club. Everything was beautiful, and everything was devastating, and I had exactly 3 seconds to decide what kind of woman I was going to be in this moment. I made my choice. I smoothed down the lavender dress I had bought specifically for this occasion, Emily's favorite color since she was 6 years old. I touched the pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother and her mother before that. I straightened my spine the way my late husband Frank always admired, and I said 2 words that would echo through the next 12 months of all our lives. "All right, son." Then I turned around. I walked back to my car with my head held high and my back perfectly straight. I did not run. I did not cry. I did not give Victoria the scene she was so clearly hoping for. I drove home in complete silence, walked into the house Frank and I had built together, and made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea. Then I sat down in Frank's old leather chair, picked up my phone, and called my lawyer. The next morning, at exactly 9 o'clock, my son David received a hand-delivered envelope at his office. What was inside that envelope would change everything. It would expose secrets he thought were buried forever. It would reveal a conspiracy that had been building for 3 years without my knowledge. It would cost him his inheritance, his marriage, his reputation, and nearly his relationship with his own daughter. But most importantly, it would teach him a lesson that 67 years of living had taught me well. You never, ever underestimate a woman just because she has gray hair and a soft voice. My name is Patricia Sullivan. I spent 40 years helping my husband build an empire. I raised 2 children, buried the love of my life, and survived things that would break most people in half. And my son just made the most expensive mistake of his entire life. By the end of this story, you will understand exactly what quiet dignity looks like when it decides to fight back. If you are watching this and you have ever been dismissed, humiliated, or underestimated by someone who should have loved you better, this story is for you. If you leave before the end, you will miss the moment when everything David thought he knew about his mother came crashing down around him. You will miss the phone call that changed Emily's life forever. You will miss finding out what Victoria had been telling my granddaughter about me for 15 years, lies so devastating that Emily stopped coming to visit and changed her phone number without ever telling me why. And you will miss the look on my son's face when he realized that the confused old woman he had been dismissing was actually 3 steps ahead of him the entire time. Stay with me. I promise you, the ending is worth it. Now, before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from today, because we genuinely love hearing from our viewers across the world. If you enjoy true stories about people who refuse to be disrespected and fight back with intelligence instead of anger, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We release new stories every single week, and trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming next. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who has been through something similar, someone who needs to know they are not alone. This is the story of how a grandmother's quiet dignity became the most powerful weapon her family had ever seen. Let me take you back. Not to the wedding. We will get there soon enough. But first you need to understand who I really am, because my son and his wife clearly forgot. My name is Patricia Sullivan, and for 42 years I was married to the love of my life, Frank Sullivan. We met in 1979 at a church picnic in Columbus, Ohio. He was 23 years old, with calloused hands and a smile that made me forget my own name. I was 21, with a fresh teaching degree and dreams of shaping young minds in a third-grade classroom. We were married within a year, and I never once regretted that decision. Frank started Sullivan Plumbing and Heating in 1983 with nothing but a single, rusty truck, a toolbox he inherited from his father, and a willingness to work 16-hour days without complaint. I remember those early years vividly, eating dinner at 10 o'clock at night because Frank was still out on emergency calls, balancing our checkbook on the kitchen table while pregnant with David, praying that the next job would come before the next bill arrived. I taught third grade at Millbrook Elementary for 4 years, and I loved those children like they were my own. There is something magical about 8-year-olds, the way they still believe in possibility, the way they look at you like you hold all the answers to the universe. But when Frank's business started growing faster than either of us expected, he came to me one evening with grease still under his fingernails and asked if I could help with the books. "Just temporarily," he said. "Just until we can afford to hire someone proper." That was 1987. I never went back to teaching. What started as temporary became permanent, and what started as balancing a checkbook became running the entire financial operation of a company that grew beyond our wildest dreams. By 2020, Sullivan Plumbing and Heating had 47 employees on payroll, 23 service vehicles on the road, and contracts with 3 major hospital systems across Ohio. We serviced commercial buildings, residential homes, and everything in between. I did the payroll every 2 weeks without fail. I filed the quarterly taxes and negotiated with the IRS when they came knocking in 2003 over a clerical error that was not even our fault. I handled every vendor relationship, every insurance renewal, every contract negotiation that required someone who could read the fine print and understand what it actually meant. Frank was the face of Sullivan Plumbing and Heating. He was the one who shook hands and slapped backs and promised customers that their problems would be solved by morning. But I was the brain behind the books, the one who made sure there was money to pay the employees who kept those promises. When people asked Frank what I did, he always said the same thing with that proud smile of his. "Patricia is the reason I am not bankrupt." He meant it too. Every single word. We were a team in the truest sense, and I never needed my name on the building to know my worth. I knew it. Frank knew it. That was enough. We had 2 children together. David came first in 1982, and Linda followed 3 years later in 1985. From the very beginning, they were different in ways that only a mother truly notices. Linda was content with what she had. She shared her toys without being asked, thanked me for dinner every single night, and grew into a woman who found joy in simple things. David was different. Not in a way I could explain when he was young, not in a way that made me worry exactly. But looking back now with the clarity that only hindsight provides, the signs were always there. David wanted what others had. He did not want to earn it through hard work and patience the way his father had. He simply wanted to have it, as though wanting something was the same as deserving it. When his classmates got new bicycles, David needed a newer one. When his friends went on vacation, David needed a better vacation. He measured his worth by comparison. And comparison is a game that nobody ever truly wins. David married Victoria in 2005, and that was the day everything in our family began to shift. Victoria came from money, but not the kind of money that teaches you its value. Her grandfather had made a fortune in commercial real estate, and by the time it trickled down to Victoria's generation, all that remained was the entitlement without the work ethic. She had never held a job for longer than 6 months. She had never balanced her own checkbook or worried about whether the mortgage payment would clear. She wore her inexperience with labor like a badge of honor, as though working for a living was something that happened to lesser people. From the moment she joined our family, she made one thing abundantly clear without ever saying the words directly. She believed she was marrying up. I saw it in the way she looked at our house during her first visit, calling it quaint in that particular tone that meant small. I saw it in the way she examined my car in the driveway, saying it looked reliable in that particular tone that meant old. I saw it in the way she looked at me, like I was the help who had somehow wandered into the family photograph. Frank saw it too. He was a man of few words when it came to family matters, preferring to let me handle the emotional complexities while he focused on keeping the business running. But one night, after a particularly tense Thanksgiving dinner, where Victoria had criticized the stuffing recipe that had been in my family for 4 generations, Frank sat down beside me with a glass of whiskey and said something I never forgot. "That woman has got $signs where her heart should be. Watch yourself around her, Patricia. She is counting every penny we have and figuring out how to get her hands on it." I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to defend my son's choice because that is what mothers do. But deep down, in that place where uncomfortable truths live, I knew Frank was right. Victoria was not in love with David. She was in love with what David stood to inherit. But David could not see it, or perhaps he did not want to see it. He was blinded by her beauty, by her polish, by the way she made him feel important. And what can a mother do when her son is determined to make a mistake? You cannot force wisdom on someone who is not ready to receive it. You can only watch and wait and hope that you are wrong. Linda took a different path entirely. She married a good man named Thomas, a high school history teacher who coached the junior varsity basketball team and volunteered at the food bank on weekends. They moved to Colorado when the boys were young, chasing mountains and fresh air and a slower pace of life. Linda calls me every single Sunday without fail. Sometimes just to chat about nothing, sometimes to ask for my pie crust recipe for the 100th time, sometimes just to say "I love you, Mom," because she knows those words matter. Her 2 boys, James and Michael, send me handmade birthday cards every year. They are good kids being raised by good parents, and I could not be prouder of the family Linda built. David calls when he needs something. That is the difference between my 2 children distilled into a single sentence. Linda calls to connect, David calls to collect. I should have paid more attention to that difference years ago. We had 3 grandchildren between our 2 families. Linda gave us James and Michael, and David and Victoria gave us Emily. Emily was my first grandchild, born on a rainy Tuesday in September 2001. I was in the delivery room when she came into this world, and I held her in my arms before her own father did because David was stuck in traffic coming from a business meeting he refused to reschedule. She was 7 pounds and 4 ounces of pure possibility, with her grandfather's eyes and her grandmother's stubborn chin, and from that very first moment, she had my whole heart wrapped around her tiny finger. For the first 12 years of her life, Emily spent every summer at our house in Ohio. Those were the golden years. The years I hold on to now, when the memories become too painful to bear. We baked chocolate chip cookies using my mother's recipe, and always ate the first batch straight from the oven, even though they were too hot. We planted tomatoes in the backyard garden and checked on them every morning like they were precious treasures growing in the soil. I taught her to sew, badly I might add, because neither of us had the patience for straight seams. I taught her to balance a checkbook properly because that skill would matter long after the crooked pillowcases were forgotten. She called me Nana, not grandmother, not grandma, but Nana, a name she invented herself when she was 2 years old and could not quite manage the harder syllables. She was my heart, walking around outside my body, and I believed with absolute certainty that nothing would ever change that. Then Victoria decided I was no longer useful. The summer visits stopped when Emily turned 13. At first, there were excuses. Emily has summer camp. Emily has soccer practice. Emily needs to focus on preparing for high school. I accepted those excuses because I wanted to believe them, because the alternative was too painful to consider. But as months turned into years and excuses turned into silence, I began to understand that something fundamental had shifted. My granddaughter was slipping away from me, and I did not know why. Frank died in 2021. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that announces itself too late and takes everything too quickly. 3 months from diagnosis to goodbye. 12 weeks to say everything we should have said over 42 years, but somehow never found the time for. He was 70 years old and still planning projects for next summer, Still talking about the cruise we would take for our 45th anniversary. Still believing he had more time. We all believe we have more time, until suddenly we do not. I held his hand in that hospital room when he took his last breath, and something inside me went quiet in a way that has never fully recovered. 42 years of partnership, of inside jokes, and shared burdens, and fights that never lasted past bedtime, gone in 12 weeks. The house felt different after that, bigger somehow, and emptier, even though nothing had physically changed except everything that actually mattered. I was 64 years old when Frank passed, a widow. And suddenly, through no particular effort of my own in that moment of grief, very wealthy. When Frank died, the business was valued at $4.8 million by an independent appraiser. A competitor who had been trying to buy us out for years finally got their wish. After taxes, legal fees, and the charitable donations Frank had specified in his will to organizations that had supported us over the years, I had $3.2 million in liquid assets sitting in various accounts. Our house was paid off completely, worth $850,000 according to the most recent assessment. The life insurance policy Frank had maintained for decades paid out $1.5 million, and the rental properties we had invested in over the years, 2 duplexes in a college town that had provided steady income for over a decade, were worth $600,000 combined. When I added it all together, my total estate came to just over $6.2 million. I did not need to work. I did not need to worry about bills or medical expenses or whether I could afford to keep the house. Frank had made sure of that. He had spent 40 years making sure I would be taken care of if something happened to him. But I did need family. Money cannot hold your hand. Money cannot call you on Sunday afternoons just to say hello. Money cannot fill the silence of an empty house where love used to live. Within 2 weeks of the funeral, before I had even finished sorting through Frank's clothes or deciding what to do with his reading glasses still sitting on the nightstand, David called. His voice had that particular tone I had come to recognize over the years, the one that meant he wanted something but was going to pretend otherwise. "Mom, we should talk about the business sale. Victoria thinks you might need help managing that much money. We know a great financial advisor who specializes in working with widows who suddenly find themselves handling large estates." He emphasized the word widows like it was a diagnosis, like grief had somehow impaired my ability to read a spreadsheet. I said no, thank you. I had been managing money for 40 years. I had negotiated contracts worth more than David's entire net worth. I did not need help, especially not from a financial advisor that Victoria happened to know. The calls continued anyway. They got more frequent and more insistent as the weeks passed. "Victoria thinks you should consider moving to a smaller place. Victoria thinks you should put the rental properties in a trust. Victoria thinks. Victoria thinks. Victoria thinks." I stopped answering every call, and then Emily stopped calling entirely. At first I thought she was just busy. She was finishing her senior year of college, applying to graduate programs, spending time with the young man she had started dating seriously. Life gets hectic at that age. I remembered being 22 and feeling like there were not enough hours in the day. So I told myself she would call when things settled down. But weeks turned into months, and my calls went to voicemail, and my text messages received one-word responses or no responses at all. Then I tried calling her directly one afternoon, and a robotic voice informed me that the number I had dialed was no longer in service. My granddaughter had changed her phone number without telling me. The girl who used to spend every summer in my house, who called me Nana and asked me to teach her how to make pie crust from scratch, had cut me out of her life without explanation. I found out why much later. I found out what Victoria had been telling Emily about me for years. Poison dripped slowly into my granddaughter's ear until she believed things about me that would break your heart to hear. But I am getting ahead of myself. Before I share that particular devastation, you need to understand what happened in the 3 weeks leading up to the wedding. You need to understand how calculated this humiliation truly was. You need to understand that what looked like a spontaneous act of cruelty at a country club entrance was actually the final move in a game that had been playing out for years without my knowledge. Stay with me. The truth is coming. Emily got engaged in January 2024, and I found out through Facebook, my granddaughter, The girl I held in the delivery room before her own father arrived. The girl who spent 12 summers baking cookies and planting tomatoes in my backyard. The girl who called me Nana until she was 15 years old. Announced her engagement to the entire world through a social media post. There was no phone call. There was no visit. There was no excited voice on the other end of the line saying, "Nana, I am getting married. Can you believe it?" Just a photograph of a diamond ring and a caption full of heart emojis and 247 comments from people congratulating her. I was commenter number 248. I typed my congratulations with shaking hands, wondering how we had arrived at this place where I learned about my own granddaughter's engagement the same way strangers did. Then in March, an invitation arrived in my mailbox. Cream-colored paper, gold lettering, the kind of elegant stationery that costs more per envelope than I used to spend on a week of groceries in the early years of my marriage. Mr. and Mrs. David Sullivan request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Emily Grace to Jonathan Thomas Whitmore. June 15, 2024. The Westbrook Country Club. Black tie optional. I held that invitation in my hands and I cried, but not from sadness. I cried from relief. Despite the distance that had grown between us, despite the unreturned phone calls and the changed phone number and the years of silence, they wanted me there. My family wanted me at this wedding. I had been wrong about everything. That is what I told myself as I pressed the invitation to my chest and thanked God for second chances. I bought a dress for the occasion, pale lavender silk, because that had been Emily's favorite color since she was 6 years old, and declared that purple was for babies, but lavender was for grown-ups. I took my mother's pearl earrings out of the safe deposit box where they had been sitting since Frank's funeral. I had my hair done at the salon I only visited for special occasions. I wrapped the gift carefully, a check for $15,000 and my grandmother's diamond brooch, the one that had been passed down through 4 generations of women in my family. I wanted Emily to have something with history, something that connected her to the women who came before her. I was ready. I was hopeful. I should have known better. 2 weeks before the wedding, I called David to discuss logistics. Hotels in the area, what time I should arrive, where I would be seated during the ceremony. The phone rang 6 times before clicking over to voicemail, and a robotic voice informed me that his mailbox was full and could not accept new messages. I called Victoria next, and the same thing happened. Then I tried Emily directly, using the phone number I had saved for 8 years, and a different robotic voice delivered a different message. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again. I told myself they were busy. Wedding planning is stressful, especially for a venue like Westbrook Country Club. They would call me back when things settled down. They did not call back. Not once. June 15th arrived, and I woke at 6 in the morning because sleep had abandoned me hours earlier. I made coffee in the quiet kitchen and sat at the table where Frank and I had shared 42 years of breakfasts. I took my time getting ready, applying makeup carefully for the first time since Frank's funeral, choosing each piece of jewelry with intention. When I looked at myself in the mirror, wearing that lavender dress with my mother's pearls around my neck, I said the words Frank used to say to me before every special occasion. "You still clean up nice, Patricia." The house felt emptier than usual when I said it to myself. The drive to Westbrook Country Club took 45 minutes, and I arrived at 4:15 in the afternoon. The ceremony was scheduled for 5 o'clock. I had plenty of time. The venue was more beautiful than I had imagined. White roses cascaded from every available surface. A string quartet played Pachelbel's canon near the garden entrance. Women in cocktail dresses and men in perfectly tailored tuxedos milled about with champagne glasses, laughing and embracing like this was the social event of the season. I recognized faces in the crowd. Mrs. Henderson from church. Dr. Patel from the hospital board where Frank had once served. The women from my book club, David's college roommate, whose name I could never remember. Victoria's sister, who looked directly at me and then through me, as though I was made of glass. I walked toward the entrance with the gift bag in one hand and my invitation ready in my purse. That is when I saw the check-in table, with 2 young women holding clipboards, and standing behind them, my son David in his tuxedo, looking directly at me without a trace of a smile on his face. I approached him the way any mother would approach her son at a family celebration. "David," I said warmly, "the venue is absolutely beautiful. You and Victoria did a wonderful job with everything." I reached out to embrace him the way I had embraced him 1,000 times throughout his life, the way mothers embrace their children at weddings and funerals and ordinary Tuesday afternoons. He stepped back. He physically stepped away from me like I was a stranger asking for directions. "Mother," he said, and the word sounded clinical and cold in a way that made my stomach tighten. Not Mom, which is what he called me when he wanted something. Not Mama, which is what he called me when he was small and frightened. Mother, like a title on an organizational chart. "Mother, can we speak privately?" "Of course," I said, but he did not move toward a private location. He stayed exactly where he was, in front of the check-in table, in front of the two young women with clipboards, in front of everyone. "Mother, you are not on the list." I laughed because surely this was a mistake. Surely there had been some administrative error that we would clear up in 30 seconds and then laugh about later. "I have the invitation right here," I said, reaching into my purse for the cream-colored paper with gold lettering. "The invitation was a mistake," David said, and his voice did not waver and his eyes did not look away from mine. "It was sent by the invitation company. A clerical error. You were on an old family list that should have been updated. It should not have been sent." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire I had not seen coming. 200 people were now looking in our direction. I could feel their eyes on my back like physical pressure. Mrs. Henderson had stopped mid-conversation. Dr. Patel was frowning. The women from my book club were whispering behind their hands. "David, I am your mother. This is my granddaughter's wedding. Surely there is room for one more person. Surely Emily wants her Nana here on the most important day of her life." My voice remained steady even as my hands began to tremble at my sides. "The guest list was finalized months ago," David said. "Victoria and I discussed it extensively. Emily agreed with our decision. This day is about the bride and groom. It is not about family drama." He said the words family drama like I was the source of conflict, like my presence alone would somehow ruin the celebration. I looked past him and saw Victoria standing 20 feet away in her mother-of-the-bride dress, watching this entire scene unfold. She was not surprised. She was not embarrassed. She was not rushing over to correct this terrible misunderstanding. She was smiling. That small, a satisfied smile I had seen 100 times over 20 years. The smile of someone getting exactly what she wanted. I looked at David, truly looked at him, searching for any trace of the boy who used to hold my hand during scary movies, the teenager who cried on my shoulder when his first girlfriend broke up with him, the young man who danced with me at his own wedding and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Mom." That person seemed very far away now. "Is this really what you want?" I asked him quietly. He did not answer. "Can I at least give Emily her gift? There is a brooch in here that belonged to my grandmother. It has been in our family for 4 generations. I want her to have it." "Leave it at the table," David said without hesitation. "The coordinator will make sure she receives it." He could not even let me hand my own granddaughter a family heirloom. He could not give me that single moment of connection. I understood then, with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins, that this was not a misunderstanding. This was intentional. This was planned. 200 witnesses to my humiliation stood around me pretending not to stare. I had a choice to make in that moment, and I made it quickly. I was not going to cry in front of these people. I was not going to beg my own son to let me into a building. I was not going to give Victoria the satisfaction of watching me fall apart in public. I straightened my shoulders. I lifted my chin. I looked at David one last time and said the only words I could manage without my voice breaking. "All right, son." Then I turned around. I walked back to my car with my spine straight and my head held high, 1 foot in front of the other. Do not run. Do not stumble. Do not look back. I heard the whispers following me across the parking lot. The gasps. Someone saying loudly enough for me to hear, "That is his mother." I got into my car. I drove 45 minutes home. I walked into my empty house. I closed the door behind me. Only then, in the privacy of the home Frank and I had built together, did I allow myself to fall apart completely. I cried for an hour, maybe two. I cried for Emily, who did not even know I had come. I cried for Frank, who was not here to see what his son had become. I cried for the family I thought I had, and the future I thought we would share. I cried until there were no tears left, and then I sat in Frank's leather chair with a cup of Earl Grey tea, and I began to think. Not about revenge, not yet, not in those first raw hours. I thought about answers. What had I done to deserve this treatment? What had happened to the son I raised? What was I missing? I picked up the phone and called the only person I knew would tell me the truth without softening the edges. Linda, my daughter in Colorado, the one who still called every Sunday. What she told me over the next 2 hours changed absolutely everything. It explained the distance. It explained Emily's silence. It explained why Victoria had been smiling. "Mom, sit down." Those were the first words out of Linda's mouth before I could even tell her what happened at the wedding. "Sit down," she said again, and something in her voice made my blood run cold. "I need to tell you something I should have told you years ago, but I did not know how to say it without sounding like I was trying to cause problems. I thought you would think I was just being dramatic or jealous of David, so I stayed quiet. And I am so sorry, Mom. I am so sorry I did not speak up sooner." I lowered myself into Frank's leather chair with the tea growing cold in my hands, and I listened to my daughter dismantle everything I thought I knew about the last 15 years of my life. "Do you remember when Emily stopped coming for summers?" Linda asked me. Of course I remembered. Emily was 15 years old. One summer she was planting tomatoes with me and learning to balance a checkbook, and the next summer she had excuses: soccer camp, college prep courses, friends she could not leave behind. I accepted those excuses because I wanted to believe them. "Victoria told Emily things about you, Mom." Linda's voice was steady, but I could hear the anger underneath. "She told her things that were not true." "What things?" I asked, though part of me already knew I did not want to hear the answer. "She told Emily you were mentally unstable. She said you had been in a psychiatric hospital back in the 1982nd and that the family kept it quiet to protect you. She told her you had violent episodes when she was a baby, that you once tried to hurt her when she was in your care, and that Frank left the business decisions to David because he was afraid of what you might do if you felt challenged. She told Emily that Daddy does not talk about it because it hurts him too much to remember what his mother put the family through." I could not speak. My throat had closed completely. I had never set foot in a psychiatric hospital in my entire life. I had never raised my hand to anyone. Not my children, not my husband, not a stranger on the street. Frank afraid of me? The man who called me his still point in every storm. The man who trusted me with every financial decision for 4 decades. The man who held my hand every night until the cancer took him? Victoria had been telling Emily these lies since she was 13 years old. Drip by drip, year after year, poison poured into my granddaughter's ear until she believed her Nana was dangerous. "Your grandmother has problems, sweetie. It is not her fault, but we need to be careful. We do not leave you alone with her because we love you too much to take that risk." 15 years of this. 15 years of my granddaughter pulling away from me, not because she did not love me, but because she was genuinely afraid of me. All those unreturned phone calls suddenly made sense. The changed phone number made sense. The way Emily flinched when I tried to hug her at Frank's funeral made sense. She was not cold. She was not ungrateful. She was terrified of a woman who existed only in Victoria's imagination. "Does David know about this?" I asked Linda. "David believes whatever Victoria tells him," she replied. "You know how he is. He has been under her influence since they started dating. If Victoria says the sky is green, David looks up and agrees. There is more, Mom." Linda paused long enough that I knew whatever came next would be worse. The wedding invitation was not a clerical error. It was a test. Victoria told one of her friends, Melissa Henderson's daughter, that she sent you that invitation specifically to see if you would actually have the nerve to show up. She bet David that you would come because you are too stubborn to stay away. And when you did show up, they had exactly what they needed. A confused elderly woman crashing a wedding she was not invited to. 200 witnesses who saw Patricia Sullivan turned away because she did not understand she was not supposed to be there. It was not incompetence. It was not a miscommunication. It was a trap designed with precision. And I had walked directly into it wearing my mother's pearls and carrying a $15,000 check for a granddaughter who had been taught to fear me. I thanked Linda. I told her I loved her. I hung up the phone and sat in my dark living room until the sun came up, thinking about everything Frank had taught me about protecting what mattered. At 7 in the morning, I made coffee. At 7:30, I showered and dressed in clothes that meant business. At 8 o'clock, I called Howard Chen, the lawyer who had handled Frank's estate and known our family for over 20 years. When I finished telling him what happened at the wedding and what Linda had revealed, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that shifted my entire understanding of the situation. "Patricia, in my experience, when someone works this hard to humiliate another person in public, there is usually a financial motive hiding underneath. Public humiliation takes effort. It takes planning. Nobody goes to that much trouble just for cruelty. Let me do some digging and see what I find." Howard connected me with a forensic accountant named Susan Delgado, who specialized in estate fraud and elder financial abuse. She was sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who could read a spreadsheet the way other people read novels, finding stories hidden in the numbers that most eyes would miss completely. For the next 2 weeks, Susan followed the money while I waited and tried to keep my hands busy with gardening and cooking and all the ordinary tasks that keep a widow from losing her mind. What she found made my blood turn to ice. David had attempted to access Frank's business accounts 3 separate times in the month following the funeral, using credentials he did not have and should not have known about. The company accountant had flagged the attempts and called me, but I had assumed it was a mistake, some kind of technical glitch. It was not a glitch. Victoria had been telling people I suffered from early-stage dementia. She told Frank's former business partners. She told our family accountant. She told the financial advisor at our bank. She was laying groundwork, building a paper trail of concerned family members who could testify that poor Patricia was losing her faculties and needed protection from herself. They had already consulted an attorney about conservatorship, about the legal process for declaring me mentally incompetent and taking control of my $6.2 million estate. They were not planning to steal my money after I died. They were planning to take it while I was still alive. The wedding humiliation was not cruelty for its own sake. It was step 1 in a carefully orchestrated plan. See how confused she is? She showed up to a wedding she was not invited to. She does not remember that we removed her from the guest list. She is not well, and we are just trying to protect her from herself. 200 witnesses to my supposed confusion. 200 people who could be called to testify that Patricia Sullivan was clearly not in her right mind. I understood everything now with terrible clarity. The whisper campaign about my mental health. The lies told to Emily to isolate me from my own family. The public humiliation designed to establish a pattern of erratic behavior. It was all building toward one moment. The moment when David and Victoria walked into a courtroom and took everything Frank and I had spent 40 years building together. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated me. Howard asked me what I wanted to do with the information Susan had gathered. I thought about Frank, about what he would want if he were sitting beside me in that leather chair. He would want me to protect myself and protect what we built together. But he would also want me to give David a chance, one final opportunity to step back from the edge and do the right thing. I asked Howard to draft a letter that made the consequences absolutely clear while still offering a path forward if David chose to take it. The letter informed David that I was aware of his attempts to access his father's accounts, aware of Victoria's campaign to convince professionals I was mentally incompetent, aware of their consultation with an attorney about conservatorship, and aware that the wedding humiliation was a deliberate act designed to establish my confusion as a matter of public record. I offered him 2 options. Option A meant signing affidavits admitting there was no basis for claims about my mental state, telling Emily the truth about the lies she had been told, and apologizing to me in writing so we could discuss a path forward as a family. Option B meant receiving nothing from my estate ever and watching the evidence I had gathered reach the State Bar Association, his employer, and every single person who had witnessed my humiliation. I gave him 72 hours to decide. The next morning at exactly 8 o'clock, a courier hand-delivered the letter to David's office. My phone rang at 8:47. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Mother, what the hell is this?" His voice was loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Not "Mom." Not "I am sorry for what we did." Not "Can we please talk about this?" Just "What the hell is this?" As though I was the one who had done something wrong. "Good morning, David. I assume you received my letter." "This is blackmail," he shouted. "No, David. Blackmail is when you threaten to reveal true information unless someone pays you money. I am not asking for money. I am asking for honesty." He screamed at me for another 5 minutes. He told me I could not do this, that this was insane, that Victoria was right about me all along. I waited until he ran out of words. 72 hours, David. Do not call me again until you have made your decision. I have nothing more to say to you. Then I hung up the phone while he was still sputtering on the other end. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From adrenaline? From the power of finally saying what needed to be said after years of swallowing my concerns and hoping things would improve on their own? I made myself another cup of tea and sat down to wait. The next call did not come from David. It came from someone I never expected to hear from. Someone whose voice I had not heard in 3 years. Someone who would change everything I thought I knew about this situation and reveal that the truth was even more complicated than I had imagined. 48 hours after I sent the letter to David, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my heart stop completely. Emily. I had not heard her voice in 3 years. My hands were trembling as I answered, and then I heard the single word that broke something open inside me. "Nana?" She called me Nana, not Mrs. Sullivan, not grandmother, but Nana, the name she had given me when she was 2 years old and could not pronounce anything longer. "Emily, sweetheart," I managed to say before she started crying. For the next hour, she told me everything, through tears that would not stop. The lies Victoria had fed her year after year. The fear she had lived with. Believing her grandmother was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. The confusion she felt during our rare interactions when I seemed completely normal. The guilt that started eating at her when she got older and began to question whether the stories made sense. But by then she was 17, then 18, then away at college, then planning a wedding. And it was easier to maintain the distance than confront the possibility that her mother had lied to her for a decade. "When you showed up at the wedding," Emily said, "I was in the bridal suite getting ready. Mom came in and told me you had shown up uninvited and that Dad had handled it. She said you were confused and had forgotten you were not supposed to be there. I did not know until after the honeymoon that it was planned. I did not know the invitation was sent on purpose. I swear to you, Nana, I did not know." I believed her completely. The pain in her voice was too raw to be anything but genuine. She asked if she and Jonathan could come over that night. Jonathan, her new husband, the man I had never met because I was not allowed at their wedding. Of course I said yes. They arrived at 7 o'clock, and when I opened the door, Emily collapsed into my arms. We held each other for 5 full minutes without speaking because words were not necessary. Jonathan stood behind her, tall and clearly uncomfortable, but trying his best to be supportive. "Mrs. Sullivan, I am sorry we are meeting this way," he said. "Call me Patricia," I told him, "or Nana. Whatever feels right." We talked until midnight, going through old photo albums I had saved from Emily's childhood. Pictures of her covered in flour from our baking disasters. Pictures of her tiny hands in mine as she learned to walk. Pictures of the tomato plants we grew together summer after summer. "I remember this," she kept saying. "I remember all of this. How could I have forgotten? How could I have believed you were dangerous when these memories were so full of love?" Then she asked me the question I had been dreading. "Nana, what are you going to do about Dad?" I looked at my granddaughter, 23 years old, and caught between her parents and her grandmother. Between lies and truth, between what was comfortable and what was right. "What do you think I should do?" I asked her. She thought for a long time before answering. "I think Dad needs to face real consequences, because if he does not, he will never change. And Mom, Victoria, I mean, she will never stop. She will find another target. She will do this to someone else." My granddaughter, wise beyond her years, had just given me permission to do what needed to be done. The 72-hour deadline came and went without a word from David. He chose silence, which was the same as choosing option B. At exactly 72 hours and 1 minute, I called Howard. "Execute the plan," I said. He did not hesitate. The will had already been changed. David was removed entirely, while Linda's children and Emily remained as beneficiaries. David and Victoria would receive nothing. Not money, not property, not even family photographs. I established an irrevocable trust for all 3 grandchildren to be distributed when they turned 30, with an independent trustee who would ensure no parental interference. Every piece of evidence Susan Delgado had gathered was compiled into a formal complaint and submitted to the State Bar Association regarding the attorney who had advised David and Victoria on how to fabricate evidence of my supposed incompetence. That attorney was suspended immediately and later surrendered her license rather than face a full investigation. Howard sent 200 letters to every person who had witnessed my humiliation at the wedding. The letters were not vindictive or emotional. They were simply factual, explaining that the incident they witnessed was a deliberate act of humiliation designed to establish false claims of mental incompetence as part of a larger plan to commit financial elder abuse. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Mrs. Henderson from church called to apologize and ask if she could bring me dinner. Dr. Patel from the hospital board expressed his outrage and support. The women from my book club removed Victoria from their group chat and invited me back to Thursday meetings. I had spent 2 years believing I was alone, forgotten, disposable. But I had never been alone. I had simply been cut off from seeing who still cared by people who wanted me to feel isolated and vulnerable. 2 weeks after the letters went out, Victoria filed for divorce. Apparently being married to David Sullivan lost its appeal when the $6 million inheritance disappeared. David called me then. Not to apologize, but to beg. "Mom, please. Victoria is leaving. I am going to lose everything. You have to help me." I reminded him that I had offered him a chance, and he had chosen silence. "This is where silence leads, David." Then I hung up. I did not hear from him again for 4 months. It was October when he appeared at my door, the leaves turning gold and red the way Frank had always loved. I was in the garden putting the tomato beds to rest for winter. Emily had been there the day before, helping me prepare for the cold months ahead. When the doorbell rang, I knew before I opened it. Something in my chest recognized the moment before it arrived. David looked old. Older than 50. Thinner. Dark circles carved under his eyes like permanent shadows. He was holding a cardboard box I recognized from my attic, filled with his childhood things he had taken after Frank died. "Mom," he said. Not mother. "Mom, can I come in?" I stepped aside and let my son enter the house where he had grown up. We sat in the living room, and he did not speak for almost 5 minutes. He just looked around at Frank's chair, at the photos on the walls, at me. Finally, he said, "I do not know how I got here. Not your house, here. Who I became, what I did to you. Victoria is gone. She took half of everything in the divorce. The house is being sold. I am renting a small apartment. Emily will not speak to me anymore. I had everything, Mom. Everything. And I threw it away because I wanted more. I wanted what was not mine yet. And I tried to take it from you. I let the silence stretch between us before I spoke. David, I love you. I have always loved you. That is not in question. But love does not mean trust. What you did? What you allowed Victoria to do? That broke something between us? I forgive you because holding on to anger would hurt me more than you. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It does not mean pretending this never happened. I do not know if we can have a relationship again. That depends on you. On whether you actually change, not because you lost everything, but because you genuinely understand why what you did was wrong. I will be watching. Emily will be watching. Your actions will tell us what your words cannot. He nodded with tears falling down his face. Before he left, he placed the box on my coffee table. I thought you might want these back. Dad's old letters to you before you were married. I did not know he had those. I thought they were lost forever. He stood to leave and asked if he could call sometimes, just to check in. You can call, I said. I will answer when I am ready." As he walked to the door, he stopped and turned back. "Mom, I know it does not matter now, but at the wedding, when I saw you walking away, you looked just like Dad. Unbreakable." Then he left. I sat alone with that box of letters, 42 years of memories, and I cried. Not from pain, but from something that felt like release, like a weight I had been carrying without realizing it had finally been set down. That was a year ago. Let me tell you where things stand now. I am 68 years old, and for the first time since Frank died, I feel truly alive. Last month I went to Portugal, the trip Frank and I always promised ourselves we would take when we retired, but never did, because there was always one more project, one more responsibility, one more reason to wait. I walked the cobblestone streets of Lisbon alone but not lonely, carrying Frank's memory with me like a warm coat. I am teaching a community college course on financial literacy for seniors, and the classroom is standing room only every Tuesday and Thursday. The irony of me teaching others how to protect their assets from predatory family members is not lost on me. I started a blog, sharing stories about navigating family conflicts and aging with dignity. Nothing viral, nothing that will make me internet famous, but the emails I receive from women my age, saying I thought I was alone, I thought I was crazy. You helped me see what was really happening. Those emails are worth more than any number of views or likes. Emily and Jonathan bought a house 30 minutes away from me. She comes for dinner every Tuesday night, and sometimes she stays over in her old childhood bedroom that I have kept exactly as it was when she was 15. Last month she told me she is pregnant, due in March. And when she said, "Nana, I want you in the delivery room like you were for me," I cried harder than I have cried since Frank's funeral. Of course I said yes. How could I say anything else? Linda flew out for Christmas with her boys, and for the first time in years, we had a real family gathering. Emily and Jonathan, James and Michael, Linda and Thomas, and me. No David, but strangely, no emptiness either. Just the family that chose to be there, the family that wanted to be together, the family that was not bound by obligation but by genuine love and respect. David calls every Sunday. I answer sometimes when I feel strong enough to hear his voice without remembering that June afternoon at the country club. He got a job as a project manager at a construction company, making $62,000 a year. He lives in a small apartment on the other side of town. Victoria took half of everything in the divorce, including the house I helped them buy. He has no girlfriend, no social life, just work and therapy and Sunday phone calls to a mother who may or may not answer. He told me last month that he has been going to therapy twice a week, trying to understand how he became someone capable of what he did. I do not know if he will ever fully understand. Some people never do, but he is trying, and that counts for something. Not everything. Not enough to erase what happened, but something. Victoria remarried 6 months after the divorce was finalized. A surgeon, 20 years older than her, recently widowed and very wealthy according to the society pages. I hope for his sake that he has a good lawyer and an even better prenuptial agreement. Some people never change. They just find new targets. But Victoria has no power over me anymore. She has no access to my family anymore. She is someone else's problem now, and I find that I can think of her without anger, without bitterness, just a kind of distant pity for someone who will never know what real love feels like because she cannot see past dollar signs. People ask me if I regret any of it. The confrontation, the letters sent to 200 people, the legal action that destroyed my son's marriage and reputation. Here is what I tell them. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my son became someone capable of such calculated cruelty. I regret the years I lost with Emily because of lies I did not know were being told. But the actions I took to protect myself and expose the truth? No. I do not regret those for a single moment. Because here is what I have learned at 68 years old. Kindness is not weakness, but neither is it unlimited. There is a difference between being loving and being a doormat. There is a difference between keeping peace and keeping quiet while someone destroys you piece by piece. When I walked away from that wedding with 200 people watching, I did not know what would happen next. I only knew that I would not cry in front of them. I would not beg my own son to let me into my granddaughter's wedding. I would not give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. That was not revenge. That was dignity. Everything that came after, the lawyer, the investigation, the systematic dismantling of their plan to steal my estate, that was not revenge either. That was protection. Protection of myself, protection of my legacy, protection of the truth that they tried so hard to bury under lies and manipulation. If you are watching this, and you are in a situation where someone is trying to make you small, trying to convince the world that you are crazy or senile or difficult because it is convenient for them, listen to me carefully. You are not too old to stand up for yourself. You are not too tired to fight back. You are not too anything. Your age is not your weakness. Your experience is your weapon. You have seen more, survived more, and handled more than these people can possibly imagine. Do not let anyone convince you that your life's work, your money, your property, or your dignity belongs to anyone but you. 200 people watched my son turn me away from my granddaughter's wedding. 1 year later, those same 200 people know the truth. My granddaughter is having a baby, and I will be there when that child enters the world. My garden is growing. My life is my own. They tried to take everything from me. They got nothing. And I got my family back, the one that actually matters. Look, I know many of you watching have been through something similar or worse. Maybe you are going through it right now. Maybe you are that grandmother who has been cut off from her grandchildren. Maybe you are that widow whose children are circling like vultures. Maybe you are that woman who everyone underestimates because you have gray hair and a soft voice. If you do not subscribe to this channel right now, you are going to miss stories that could change your life. Stories that will show you exactly how to protect yourself from the people who should love you but only see dollar signs. I'm not trying to scare you, but the truth is that elder financial abuse is happening every single day to women just like us. And the only way to protect yourself is to know the signs and know your rights. So hit that subscribe button now. Turn on the notification bell. Do not wait until it is too late. Leave a comment and tell me your story. Have you ever been underestimated because of your age? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who only saw you as a bank account? Have you ever had to choose dignity over peace? I read every single comment. I respond when I can. We are building a community here of women who refuse to be victims, who refuse to be silent, who refuse to let anyone treat them as less than they are worth. Share this video with your mother, your grandmother, your friend who needs to hear it. Let her know she is not alone. Let her know that having gray hair does not mean you have gray matter. Let her know that quiet does not mean weak. Next week, I am sharing the story of Margaret, a 71-year-old retired school teacher whose own daughter tried to have her committed to a psychiatric facility to get control of her house. What her daughter did not know was that Margaret had been recording every conversation for 6 months. The moment those recordings played in the courtroom will give you chills. You do not want to miss it. Subscribe now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Patricia Sullivan. I am 68 years old, and I am just getting started. Remember, the ones who underestimate you always regret it in the end. Until next time.